to make this sweater, I'm going to quickly gloss over the materials list that we need in order to get started. For our yarn, you'll need a number 4 medium or worsted weight fiber. I'm personally going to be using the Noro Yarns Madara, which is a blend of wool, silk, and alpaca. I'll also be using a 5.0 millimeter crochet hook, along with a few different stitch markers, some scissors, darning needles, and lastly, a measuring tape. So now that I have all the materials covered, let's go ahead and dive into the pattern. Alright, so to get started on this sweater, we need to begin by making a starting chain using multiples of 4 plus 2. The starting chain is going to be significantly smaller than the rest of the body panel, so what I want to do is make sure that my starting chain is stretched to reach. Now again, I'm going to be using multiples of 4 plus 2, so I'm going to chain 1, 2, 3, 4, and then again 1, 2, 3, 4. And I'll just repeat this. So for my example, I want my sweater to have a width of about 21 to 22 inches wide. So I've just created a starting chain of 60 plus 2, and again 60 is a multiple of 4. So with my chain of 62, if I line it up here with my measuring tape, lying flat with no stretch, it's about 18 inches long. But again, I do want this to be a stretch to reach measurement. So if I give it a nice old tug and kind of stretch it out a bit, you can see that it does reach to 21 inches. And by no means is this like an excessive stretch all the way out here. Apply a little bit of pressure and stretch it out a few inches. So this is what I can expect my front panel's width to look like. So now that I have my starting chain of 62, we can go ahead and move on to row number 1. For row 1, I'm going to place a single crochet into the second loop from my hook. So I'm going to skip that first loop, insert into the second, but for this pattern, I'm just going to roll it over and pick up the back bump. So I'm going to work my first single crochet into that back bump just to ensure that we have an even stretch across row 1. So there is my first single crochet. At this point, I'm going to go ahead and chain 5. 1, 2, 3, 4, and 5. I'm going to skip the next 3 chains and insert my hook into the 4th chain from my hook. So I'm just going to roll it over, grab that back bump, and work a single crochet. So insert, pull up my loop, yarn over, and pull through both of those loops. From here, what I'm going to do again is chain 5. 1, 2, 3, 4, and 5. And I'm going to skip the next 3 loops and insert my hook into the 4th chain. So I'm going to count out 1, 2, 3, and then here at my 4th, I can turn it over, find that back bump, and work a single crochet. And from here, the pattern is going to repeat until the very end of the row. So once again, chain 5 and 5, and I'm going to count out 3, 1, 2, 3, and insert my hook into the 4th chain. So roll it over, grab that back bump, and work a single crochet. So far, this is what your project should look like. I'm just going to repeat this until the very end of the row. So once more, after my single crochet, I can create that chain of 5, 3, 4, and 5. I'm going to count out and skip the next 3 chains. I have 1, 2, and 3, and then I'm going to insert my hook into the 4th chain. And then here I can single crochet. So just repeat this until the very end of your row. I'm starting to come up here to the very end of row 1, and I still have one more little chain section to create. So once more, 1, 2, 3, 4, and 5. And if I skip 3 and insert my hook into the 4th stitch, this will also be the very last chain in the row. So here I can work a single crochet, and this is the end of row 1. To start working on row 2, I'm actually going to be using a treble crochet. So to go ahead and chain our work and turn for the row, I'm going to create a chain of 4. So 1, 2, 3, and 4. And this is going to count as my very first treble crochet in the row. So from here, I can go ahead and turn my work. So here for the start of row 2, this chain of 4 counts as the very first treble crochet stitch. So what I'm going to do next is work 5 treble crochet directly into this very first chain space right here. So I'm going to yarn over twice, and now you should have 3 loops on the very top of your hook. I'm going to go directly into that open chain space and work my first treble. So I'm gonna pull up a loop, yarn over, pull through 2, yarn over, pull through 2, and yarn over and pull through 2. And that is how you work a treble crochet. So now that I have 1 in there, let's go ahead and add 4 more. Yarn over twice, insert directly into that stitch, and work a treble crochet. So there is my second. Yarn over twice, insert, pull up a loop, yarn over, pull through 2, yarn over, pull through 2, and 1 more, yarn over and pull through 2. So now I have 3. Let's go ahead and work 2 more directly into this open chain space. There's my 4th, and for my last treble crochet, go right into that chain space and work your treble. So this is how the stitches should be looking. Again, you're going to go directly into that chain space instead of working physically into those loops. And from here, I'm just going to continue to place 5 treble crochet into each chain space. So looking at this next chain space, I'm going to go ahead and work 5 treble crochet, going directly into that space. Here is my first treble. Here is my second. A third. My fourth. And for the last and 5th, go right back into that same stitch and work your 5. And you can go ahead and repeat this pattern until the very end of your row. As I start to approach the end of row 2, you'll see that I still have 1 more chain section left. So once more, I'm going to work my last 5 treble crochet. And now to go ahead and finish out row 2, I'm going to place 1 last treble crochet into the single crochet right here, which is this very last stitch. So I'm just going to yarn over twice, find that very last stitch in the row, which is my single crochet, and work a treble. So this is the end of row 2. Again, you'll notice that we have a treble crochet at the very end of the row, and here at the start of the row, that chain of 4 does count as a treble. So a treble at the start and a treble at the end. So let's go ahead and start working on row 3. I'm going to start by chaining 1 and turning my work. And here for the start of row 3, I'm going to place a single crochet into the very first stitch. So I'm going to insert and work a single. And now row 3 is going to be a very similar repeat to row 1. So once again, I'm going to chain 5. 1, 2, 3, 4, and 5. And what I want to do is place my hook in between the 5 treble crochet clusters. So if you look nice and close, I have my 5 treble crochet right here. I'm just going to insert my hook in between right before the start of the next 5 treble crochet. So I'm not going to be going directly into any stitches. I'm just going to be inserting beneath and in between those 5 clusters. So I'm going to go through and single crochet right here. And again, I can chain 5. 1, 2, 3, 4, and 5. I'm going to skip the next 5 trebles, so 1, 2, 3, 4, and 5. And once more, I'm going to insert my hook for that single crochet directly after this 5th treble crochet in between each of these like little cluster sections. So again, I'm going to pick up underneath and single crochet right here. And we're just going to repeat this pattern until the very end of our row. And again, I'm going to skip the next 5 treble crochet and insert my hook in between into this little space right here, which separates each of the 5 trebles. And now I can single crochet. So go ahead and repeat this until the very end of your row. And as I start to approach the very end of row 3, you'll notice that I still have 1 little chain section to create to finish out the row. So once more, I'm going to chain my 5. 1, 2, 3, 4, and 5. And for this very last chain section, I'm going to pick up the 4th chain in that chain of 4 from the very beginning of the row. So again, I was going to pick up this very last chain space right here. I'm going to pick up both of those 2 top loops just to make the end of the row nice and flat and even. And then here I can place my very last single crochet. So this is the end of row 3. So at this point in the pattern, now that we have a nice little base section created right here, row 4 is going to be a repeat of row 2, and moving forward, row 5 will be a repeat of row 3. So we're really just going to be repeating the chain section rows and then these treble crochet rows. So let's go ahead and start row 4. Here at the very end of the row, what I'm going to do is chain 4. 1, 2, 3, 4. So now that we have that chain of 4 and this counts as our very first stitch, I'm going to move on to our chain sections right here. And once more, I'm going to place 5 treble crochet all into the same chain section. So I'm going to yarn over twice, pick up underneath that chain section, and work my treble crochet. So there is the first treble in the little cluster of 5, and let's go ahead and add 4 more. So underneath, here is my second treble crochet, yarning over twice, going right back into that chain section. Here's 3. Here is my 4th treble, and one last time for my 5th. But we're always going to be working 5 treble crochet into each chain section. So moving on to this very next chain, we're just going to start that process all over again. I'm going to yarn over twice, pick up that chain section, and work 5 treble crochet. As you can hopefully see, I have just worked my last little group or cluster, if you will, of the 5 treble crochet. But once more at the very end of the row, we do want to finish out with one last treble crochet into that single crochet, which is the very last stitch in the row. So just make sure that you're going into that single crochet, picking up both 2 top loops, and work your very last treble crochet. So the end of your row should be looking like this. And now at this point, like I said, row 5 will be a repeat of row 3, and row 6 is going to be a repeat of row 4. So we're just going to repeat rows 2 and 3 over and over. And at this point, you want to add on as many rows to your liking until you can get the very top of the sweater to reach your neckline. Now that my panel is starting to approach the base of my neck, I wanted to take a second to show you guys how I kind of size up the panel up against my own body. Now, the first thing that I want you guys to keep in mind is that towards the end of this project, we will be adding on a few rows of like ribbing, so like a little bit of a bottom band to the base of the sweater. And we also want to make sure that I'm aligning my very last row very close to where the base of my neck starts. Now, you don't have to bring the panel all the way up to where it's touching your neck, but you do just kind of want to get it in that general area. And of course, the closer that you get it to the base of your neck, the tighter your neckline will be. And again, just double check that you are accounting for an extra 2 inches or even more, just depending on how many rows of ribbing that you want to add on. And for some quick measurements, the width of my panel did end up stretching out to reach about 21 inches wide. And then at this point, I also have about 15 inches tall, so from the base of my sweater to the top of my neck. So far for my front panel, I have worked up a total of 31 rows, which means I did finish off my last row with my chain 1 sections. So you'll see that running across this very last row right here. But again, because we have the pattern repeats of the chain row and then the treble crochet row, in total I have 15 clusters or groups of these treble crochet. So now at this point, I do want to start working on our neckline, but what I need to do is determine how many stitches or how many group clusters I want to leave off at the center of my neckline. Because at this point, we're going to pick up where we last left off and begin working rows up until the stitch marker, turning our work and then working backwards to the edge of the panel, and then repeating this over and over. But of course, we do want to work some decreases along this neckline here to slowly kind of slope out the neckline like this and angle it. And then once I have a few inches there, I will continue to work straight up the panel. Now for my own size, because I have 15 clusters, so again, I have 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, 11, 12, 13, 14, 15. That is an odd number, which means we need to leave off one cluster here in the center. And then I have placed my stitch markers into each chain space on the sides of this center cluster. So just to kind of recap, because I have an odd number of clusters, I need to leave off an odd number of clusters here at the center. Now, if you have an even number of clusters across your panel, for example, 16, 18, or 20, then you're going to want to leave off an even number of clusters along the center. And again, if you have an even number of clusters, then you're going to want to leave off at least 2 of these clusters at the center, and then place your stitch markers on the sides of your center. I hope that kind of makes sense, but yeah, just a safe rule of thumb is that if you have an odd number of clusters, then leave off an odd number of clusters at the center. If you have an even number of clusters across your front panel, then leave off any amount of even clusters at the center of your neckline. So at this point, what I'm going to do is go back into my very last stitch and pick up where I've left off. And now I'm going to begin working back across this front panel. You can kind of consider this like the shoulder section of the front panel. And then as I begin to approach the end of my row, again, that's where my stitch marker is. This is where I will begin to work decrease stitches. Picking back up at the very end of my last row, I'm going to begin working on row 1 of the neckline. So from here, I can chain 4 and turn my work. And following the same pattern repeats, what I'm going to do is work my 5 treble crochet all into this very first cluster. So again, we're kind of just repeating the same pattern steps. And once again, I'm going to move on to the next chain space and work my 5 treble. And I'm just going to repeat this until I reach my very last chain space where my stitch marker is placed. Now that I'm starting to approach my stitch marker place, you'll notice that I've just worked my last cluster or my last group of the 5 treble crochet. Now, because this signifies the very end of the row, we do need to work a little bit of a decrease, if you will. So here into my very last chain space for my neckline, what I'm going to do is just work 2 treble crochet into this chain space. So I'm going to go in, work my first treble crochet, and one more time for a second. So this is going to be the end of row 1 for the neckline. To start row 2 of the neckline, I'm going to chain 1 and turn my work. And now for the start of row 2, we do need to work another little decrease. So what I'm going to do is skip these first 2 treble crochet in the row and insert my hook into the space between. And this is where I'm going to work my first single crochet. So this is technically the start of row 2, and we're kind of skipping over these stitches at the very beginning. And now at this point, I can kind of repeat that same traditional pattern until the end of my row. So I'm going to chain 5, 3, 4, 5, and then skip 5 treble crochet, insert and single crochet, and again chain 5, skip 5 treble crochet, insert and single crochet. And I'm just going to repeat my chain 5 sections until the very end of my row. To go ahead and start working on row 3 of the neckline, I've already chained my 4 at the start of the row, and just like normal, I'm going to work my 5 treble crochet into each chain space. And I'm just going to repeat the same pattern steps until I reach my very last chain space in the row. So I've just finished working up row 3 of the neckline, and as you'll see, I'm coming up onto my very last chain 5 space in the row. What I want to do is work only 2 treble crochet into this last chain space. So work your 1, and again place a second. And now to go ahead and finish out row 3, I'm going to place 1 last treble crochet into the single crochet from the start of the row prior. So remember how we kind of skipped these first few stitches and worked that single right before this cluster right here. I'm just going to insert into that single crochet space and work a treble crochet. So now at this point, if I kind of set my work down and pull out my hook,
you should begin to notice a slight kind of tapering or decrease to your neckline rows. To get started on row 4, I have already chained 1 and turned my work. And now for the very start of the row, what I want to do is simply skip over these first 3 stitches and insert my hook into that space between the 2 clusters. So again, I'm skipping over the chain 4 space and the next 2 treble crochet. And I'm just going to insert my hook right here and place a single crochet. So now at this point that I have my first single crochet of the row, I'm just going to carry back on with the standard pattern. So once again, I'm going to chain my 5, skip the next 5 stitches and single crochet, chain 5, skip 5, single crochet. Now at this point, I can go ahead and start working on row 5 of the neckline, and row 5 and onwards includes no more decreases because we did set up the end of our row perfectly. So what I'm gonna do is carry on with this pattern like normal. I'm gonna pick back up here with my chain of 4 for my first treble crochet. And now I can just continue working the 5 treble into each chain space across the row. I'm starting to approach the end of row 5, and as you can see, I've just worked my last group of the 5 treble crochet. And to go ahead and finish out the row, I'm going to place 1 last treble crochet into the single crochet space. So this is technically the very last stitch in the row. I'm going to insert my hook and work my last treble crochet. And now at this point, you should notice that the work is set up perfectly for standard repeats. So at this point, I'm just going to continue to add on basic rows, repeating rows 2 and 3 until the very top of this panel reaches the top of my shoulders. So now after this treble crochet row, I'm going to alternate back to the chain of 5 row. I'm going to work my single crochet, chain 5, single crochet, all the way until the very end of the row. So I just got done working up on the first shoulder section, and as you'll notice, I have left off on a treble crochet row. And as you guys previously saw, I worked 4 rows of decreases. And then again, in order to reach the very top of my shoulders, I had to work up a few more rows. So I worked 1 row of trebles, 1 row of the chain sections, and then 1 last final row of trebles. So just a quick recap from the base of my neckline to the very top of my shoulders, I worked up a total of 7 rows, and that gets me 1, 2, 3, 4 cluster rows of the treble crochets. So at this point, now that it does officially reach the very top of my shoulder, of course we want to repeat these same steps over onto the other edge of the neckline. So once again, just insert your hook into that last and final stitch, and then repeat those same steps. So work your total number of rows of decreases, and then once you have those decrease rows matched, you can go ahead and work up the rest of the shoulder section. My front panel is all completed. I can't quite fit the whole thing on camera because it is rather long. And now at this point that the front panel is all done, we can go ahead and start working on the back panel. And really quickly, before we start making our back panel, what we want to make sure to do is take the total number of rows from the front panel and then create a matching back panel. So if you guys remember, when I worked up to the neckline, I had a total of 15 clusters. And then for the neckline section, I added on an additional 1, 2, 3, 4. So in total, I have 19 clusters, which is also a total of 38 rows. So keeping that total row count of 38 rows, or also 19 clusters, I've just created my matching back panel. So again, just a quick little recap, you're gonna wanna create the same amount of your starting chains and then just follow the same exact pattern all the way up until you reach that neckline. And of course, the only difference is that we're not going to be leaving off that little bit of a crew neck center. So once I reached my 15th row, I just continued to work up an additional 4 more clusters. So I added on, I think, what was that, like 7 rows. And then all in all, the back panel reaches the very top. And now at this point, before we move on to making the sleeves, what I want to do is very quickly here, I'm just going to be reattaching a new strand of yarn onto these corners, and then I'm going to be whip stitching or even just mattress seaming the front shoulder section right here. And then of course we're going to move on to the other side. So attach a new strand of yarn over here on this corner, or you could also use any tails that you have remaining if you have like really long tails like I do. I'm just going to use my darning needle, and then I'm going to whip stitch the other shoulder panel together like this. So all in all, we should have the top shoulder sections connected. So picking up here, getting ready to whip stitch the very top of our shoulders together. As you can see, I've just reattached a super long tail to the back panel corner edge. What I'm gonna do is take my darning needle and insert it through the very top loops on the front panel. So this is technically my chain of 4 at the start of the row. So I'm just gonna go through both of those 2 loops. And I'm also going to be picking up this very first stitch here on the back panel through both of those 2 top loops. So you should have 4 loops across your darning needle, and then I'm just gonna pull this through. So when I pull on the tail, it should tighten up and sew that edge together. I'm just gonna look for my very next available stitch and pick up both 2 top loops, and I'm gonna match it to the next stitch on the back panel. So take your time, make sure that you're not skipping any of your stitches, but these should align really evenly. So looking here, this is my first treble crochet in my cluster of 5, and I'm matching it with the first treble crochet in the cluster of 5 on the back panel. So every stitch should match up, and then I'm just gonna pull that tail through. Find the next available stitch, and the next available stitch on the back side, insert my darning needle, and pull through my tail. Now I've just gotten done attaching the front and the back panels together, and so far this is what your piece should be looking like. Now I do still have it with the wrong sides out, so you can definitely see like that shoulder seam, but again here on the right side of the panel it should be virtually seamless. Like look how good that join looks. And now at this point we can begin working on the sleeves. Now what I want to do is create my sleeves as a separate panel before we go ahead and stitch together the sides of the body. Now we do have to take 2 quick measurements so that we know how large and how long we need to create our sleeves. So the first thing that I'm going to do is pop on the front and the back panel physically onto my body so that I can see just how wide the body panel is. Next, I'm going to take a measuring tape and hold it all the way up from one arm to the edge of the front panel. Now keep in mind, we do want to eventually add on like a little bit of a ribbing or a cuff to our sleeves. The length of the cuff that you want to add is ultimately going to be up to you, but I'm going to aim for about 2 inches for my cuff section. So I'm going to start my measurement from the longest point that I want my sleeve to hit, and then measure all the way to the edge of my front panel. I'm gonna take that measurement and subtract about 2 inches, and that is how long I do want the sleeve panel to be. Now the next measurement that we'll need to take is the width of our sleeve. So there are 2 different ways that you can kind of go about measuring out your sleeve circumference. Of course, the first option is to simply use a measuring tape, wrap it around your arms, and kind of determine how wide you'd like that sleeve to be. And then of course, use that starting chain multiples method with the multiple of 4, and then just kind of create your smaller sleeve panel. The second method to figuring out the width of your sleeve is honestly gonna be kind of like a little bit of a cheat code. Now that we've already created a front panel, we can very easily see all of the groups of the 5 treble crochets, and we're going to use these to kind of estimate how long our starting chain is going to be. So for example, I'm just going to look here at this front panel, and I'm just going to fold over a certain amount and kind of determine how wide I would like my sleeve to be. So looking here, if I kind of fold it in half, I have 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, and I'm just going to fold the edge over to the 7th cluster from the edge of my row. So if I were to create a 7 cluster sleeve, this is roughly how wide it would be. And if I try to like wiggle my arm through, it does look to be pretty tight. And again, we do want to make sure that the sleeve hits our upper bicep area, because that is where traditionally sweaters can get a little bit tight on your arms. So what I'm going to do is actually count out 5 clusters of the treble crochets. So I've got 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, and 9. So here is my 9th cluster, and if I fold the edge of my panel over onto itself, this is roughly how wide I can expect my sleeve to be. Now for me, because I do like my stuff a little bit wider and baggier,
This is a width that I am much more comfortable with. So again, if I kind of like wiggle my arm in and align onto the 9th cluster, this is how wide my sleeve is going to be. And honestly, I really like this width. So again, remember that with our starting chain, we do need to use multiples of 4. But the fun thing with the pattern is that each multiple of 4 does make up one group of the 5 treble crochets. So for my starting chain, I will need to create 4 times my 9 clusters. So 4 times 9 is 36, and then an additional 2 for that starting chain. And that is kind of like my little cheat code to determining how wide the sleeves need to be. And you can honestly use this method for any width sleeve that you're looking for. So whether you just want a tight little sleeve this wide, or you're looking for something super wide like way over here, all you need to do is kind of map out how many clusters of the treble crochets that you have, take that base number and multiply it by your 4 plus 2, and that is how long your starting chain needs to be. Using the method that I just described, I've decided that I want the width of my first sleeve to be about 9 clusters of the treble crochets wide. So I'm gonna take 9 times 4, which is 36, and then add on an additional 2 for the starting chain. So again, I'm just going to create my slip knot and then create my chain of 9 times 4 plus 2. So here is my starting chain for the sleeve section. And now at this point, we can move into row 1 of the basic pattern. So again, I'm just gonna turn my work over. I'm gonna skip the first loop from my hook and insert into the second loop from my hook and work a single crochet. And then from here, I can chain 5, 2, 3, 4, and 5. I'm going to skip the next 3 stitches and insert my hook into the 4th chain space and single crochet. And again, chain 5, 1, 2, 3, 4, and 5. Skip the next 3, so 1, 2, 3, and insert my hook into the 4th chain and single crochet. And again, this is just row 1 from the basic pattern, and I'm just gonna repeat this until the end of my row. Here is row 1 of the sleeve all created, and now at this point I can go ahead and chain 4 and turn my work. 1, 2, 3, 4. And now here for row 2, again, we're following the same exact steps from the body panels. So now here for row 2, I already have my chain of 4, which counts as the first treble crochet. And like normal, I'm going to yarn over twice, go into that first chain 5 section and work a treble crochet. So here is my first treble in that group of 5. And again, I'm going to add 4 more trebles directly into this chain space. So here is my first group of the 5 treble crochets. And like normal, I'm just going to continue on with this down my row. As I'm starting to approach the very end of row 2, you'll notice that I just worked my last cluster or my last group of 5 treble crochet. And lastly, to finish out the row, we do need to work 1 last treble crochet into the very last stitch, which is the single crochet right here. So I'm just going to pick up that stitch, insert, and work the last treble crochet in the row. So this is how row 2 should be looking for your sleeve. And at this point, I'm just going to repeat the next few rows following the same exact pattern from the body panel section. So row 3 should be a repeat using the chain sections and the single crochets. And then row 4 will be a repeat of row 2. And just continue to add on those rows until you reach your total length for the sleeves. Now that my first sleeve is done, here I am just kind of double checking and trying on the sleeve onto my arm. I'm going to align the very last row all the way up against the body panels. And then as you'll see, I did make sure to leave off about 2 inches worth until the very edge of my wrist for the cuff. I just got done working up my first sleeve and this is how she's looking. So again, if you do like a quick little recap, I have 9 of these clusters of the treble crochets, and all together I worked up 15 total clusters. So I have 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, 11, 12, 13, 14, and 15, which means that in total I did work 30 rows. So I do want to leave off my sleeve. I want to end my work on a treble crochet row. So now, of course, once you've finished working on your first sleeve, you're going to want to go ahead, start a new chain and make a second matching sleeve. So at this point, now that we have both of the sleeves done as well as the front and the back panel, we're gonna take a moment here, stretch out and lay out our fabric. And once we have our sweater nice and opened up, we will be attaching our sleeves to the edge of the panel on the front and the back panel. So as you can see, I still have the wrong sides turned out. We have the shoulder seams right here. I'm going to grab the first sleeve panel and just kind of turn it sideways like this. And what I want to do next is mark off the very center or middle stitch. So again, if we're looking at my sleeve like this, I do have an odd number of these clusters. So I've just found the middle cluster and that middle center stitch. And I've used the stitch marker to mark literally that very center stitch. So what I want to do is align this stitch marker with our shoulder seam right here on the edge. So again, I'm just gonna take my sleeve, turn it sideways, and align my stitch marker or the center stitch with the shoulder seam right here. And I'm just going to use the stitch marker and physically link it to the front and the back panel so that it's attached and it doesn't move while we're sewing it. I also just want to use an extra few stitch markers to pin down the corners of the sleeve. So I'm just going to find a spot along the edge of this panel right here. And then just to make sure, I do want to count out or even measure how far down I've pinned the edge of the sleeve and repeat that to the top section of the sleeve. And then again, I'm just going to use another stitch marker right here to pin it onto the edge of the panel. So I've just taken the time to attach my 2 extra stitch markers to the corners of my sleeve. If you still have a very long tail connected to your sleeve like I do, then you can just use your darning needle to weave it through and use this tail to whip stitch the sleeve onto the body. So I just got done seaming the first sleeve onto the body panels, and this is what your work should be looking like. So now at this point, I can go ahead and repeat this process with the other sleeve. I'm just going to take my other sleeve, find that center stitch, and repeat those same process. So make sure that you measure out exactly how long you're stretching your sleeve on this edge, just to make sure that it does match with your previous edge right here. And then, yeah, just go ahead and seam up that sleeve. So now the next step is to seam underneath the arms and then straight down the body. So in order to do that step, I do like to start out with it laid all flat like this. And then next, what I'm gonna do is pinch right here at the shoulder seams. I'm going to grab this and lay it flat upon itself. So just like this, I'm just gonna pinch the shoulder section and then bring the front panel on top of the back panel. Just straighten it out a little bit like this. And then here with the sleeves, I like to also fold those directly on top of themselves, just like this. So now that we have the sweater lying flat upon itself, the next step is to seam together not only the underarm section right here, as well as straight down the body panel. So you can either start at the very base of the sweater, attach a new yarn right here, and then just begin whip stitching or even single crocheting all the way up. Once you hit the armpit, you do want to pivot and then work straight across the sleeve section. Or if you're like me, I kind of like to start with the sleeve section first. So what I'm going to do is attach a new yarn through either corner of the sleeve, and then I'm just going to begin whip stitching all the way up the sleeve. And then once I hit the underarm section, I'm going to pivot and then work straight down the body panel. So now that it's fully connected, the very last and final steps that we need to work on is to add a little bit of a collar to the neckline, as well as some type of ribbing to the cuffs of the sleeves. And then lastly, we'll also add that same ribbing along the bottom band of the sweater. So the first thing that I'm gonna work on is the collar.
What I want to do is attach a new yarn to the center back part of the collar, so anywhere along the back panel right here. And once my yarn's connected, I'm just going to start placing single crochets in the round to completely cover up this neck opening. So for the first round, it's really just going to be single crochets wherever I can fit them and space them out evenly. And then for the second row and the third row, and however many total rows you want for the collar, I'm going to be alternating between a front post stitch and a back post stitch. So let's go ahead and attach our new yarn again to the center back portion. I'm just gonna find, honestly, any stitch that I want, whatever looks kind of towards the center, and then I can just loop through my new yarn. And then from here, I can just tie off a very simple knot. So now that my yarn is connected, I'm just gonna start placing single crochets. Now, along this back panel, I'm just gonna work one single crochet into every stitch available. But once I start approaching the tapered section of the neckline, you do just kind of have to eyeball and pick out any spot that you feel the single crochet would work, because there's not physical stitches to work into. Really take your time and try to space them out as evenly as possible. So I'm going to take my crochet hook and go right back into that stitch where I have attached my yarn. And from here, I'm just going to pull up a loop and chain one. And at this point, I'm going to go right back into that same stitch and work my first single crochet. So there is my first. And again, looking at the next stitch, just placing one single crochet into every stitch space available. And then now at this point, I'm starting to approach, again, that front panel section. So just take your time, find any old spot that looks like it could use single crochet. And honestly, my trick with the collar is to really just take my time and make sure that there's not too much of a gap between my single crochets. So right here, I'm gonna be working across one of the treble crochets. So I'm really just gonna go into that stitch, or into like the body of it, a couple of times just to kind of fill out the empty space. I can do one more, honestly. And then now I'm just approaching another random spot, so place another single crochet. So at this point, I've just worked across half of the back panel. I'm starting to come up across the front section of the neckline. And of course, because we have this very interesting pattern with the chains and then the trebles, what I personally want to do is work into the stitch with the treble instead of into the chain spaces. If I were to just place all of my stitches into the chains, we're gonna have kind of like an awkward gap between the sweater and the collar. So what I personally want to do is, when I'm placing my single crochets, I'm just going to be skipping down. So I'm gonna skip over this chain and I'm just gonna insert it into the stitch of the treble crochet. So now I can pick up that loop and work a standard single crochet. And again, I'm just gonna look for the next available stitch, which is right here, and work our single crochets again through the treble crochet stitch. So once more, we're skipping over this chain and just going into that treble and then finishing out the single crochet. And then now, because we've skipped over that chain, our neckline is going to be a lot tighter. The neckline is going to look a little bit more fluid and connected to the body of the panel. Now that I've worked across all of the treble crochets, I'm approaching the single crochet in between all of the chains. So for this one, I'm just going to go directly into that single crochet space and work a regular single crochet on top. I am going to choose to skip one of these treble crochets because I don't want my work to get too tight. So I'm personally just going to pick up at the second treble crochet available. This is just a personal choice. Again, if you have a larger sweater or you want this to be even more oversized, you can choose to pick up as many stitches as you want, or honestly as little stitches, but just keep in mind that the less stitches you pick up, the tighter your neckline is going to be. And of course, the more stitches that you pick up, the more wide and loose the fit of the neckline is going to be. So I'm starting to come up here to the very end of my row, and I still have to slip stitch into the chain one space from the start of the row. But really quickly, I do just want to do a final count of how many single crochet I have across the neckline. So when you finish up row 1, you do want to have an even number of single crochets, and that is because, again, we want to alternate between the front post and the back post, and we don't want the end of the row to overlap. So in total for my neckline, I have exactly 70 single crochets spaced out. And now at this point, I can go ahead and pick back up by slipping into the chain 1 space at the start of the row and then slip stitch the row shut. So that is the end of row 1. For row 2, I'm going to start off by chaining 1 and then turning my work over. And again, we want to turn our work at the end of every single row. Now here for row 2, again, I do want to alternate between a front post single crochet and a back post single crochet. So looking at my very first stitch in the row, I want to start with a front post single crochet. So what I want to do, instead of going just directly into the 2 top loops like this, what I want to do is wrap my hook around the body of the single crochet. So for the front post, I'm going to insert underneath those 2 top loops, and then I'm going to wrap around and poke out the other side of that stitch. So for the front post stitches, the body of the stitch will be resting across the front of your hook. So now that I have my hook inserted correctly, I'm just going to yarn over like normal and then pull up that loop and finish out my single crochet. So that is the front post stitch. Now for the second stitch in the row, I'm going to alternate to the back post. So we're going to do the same thing but reversed. What I'm going to do is enter in through the back side of the work. So again, we're kind of picking up those 2 top loops, but then we're going to wrap around the body of the single crochet and then poke back out onto the back side. And then for the back post stitches, your post is resting across the back side of your hook. So there's that single crochet. But again, I can just yarn over and pull up that loop. Back posts get a little bit tricky, so you do want to take your time. And now that I have 2 on the hook like normal, I can finish out my single crochet. So that is a back post stitch. And now we're going to alternate back to the front post. So again, I just want to focus on this single crochet right here. I'm going to insert on the right side of the stitch, pop back out on the left side of the stitch so that the body of the single crochet is resting across the front part of my hook. And now I can yarn over and finish out my single crochet. And once more, this next stitch right here is going to be a back post. So I'm going to insert from the back side, wrap around the body, and then poke back out. And for all those who are curious, this is kind of what the top of your work should look like. So we have the 2 front loops on this side and then the other 2 front loops over here. But this is, again, the back post. So I can yarn over, bring up that loop, and finish my single crochet. And because we have an even number of stitches, you should finish on a back post stitch because we started with a front post stitch. And we're just going to repeat this across the entire row 2. As I'm approaching the end of row 2, you'll notice that I just worked a front post stitch, but I still have 1 more single crochet to go before I join it in the round. So once more for the very last and final stitch, you should end on a back post single crochet. And now that I have that one all finished up, I can go ahead and finish out the row by slipping into the chain 1 space that we created, that chain 1 at the start of the row, and then we can slip stitch the row closed. But hopefully even after row 2, you should notice a slight bulging of the front post stitches. We can go ahead and start working on row 3. So what I'm going to do again is chain 1 at the start of my row and turn my work. And now for row 3 and the start of every single row after, you will always begin every single row with a front post stitch and you will always end it with a back post. And that is because we are turning our work at the end of every single row. So keep in mind that technically that very last stitch that we worked is a back post stitch, but now when our work is turned around and it's facing us, this is considered a front post stitch. So I'm going to start off here with a standard front post single crochet. I'm just going to wrap around the body of the stitch like normal and work my first front post stitch. And then looking at the next stitch, we're going to alternate to the back post. So wrapping around that stitch to create the back post. It gets a little bit tight, so make sure that you're kind of gentle with your yarn. And there is a back post. Now we're going to come back here for the front post stitch. And then for the next one, alternate to the back post single crochet. And then again, another front post and a back post. Oh, we lost it. See, that's what I meant when I said that sometimes the work gets a little bit tight for the back post stitches. So I'm just going to continue on with the front and the back post for the whole neckline. And at this point, it is totally up to you in regards to how many rows you want to add on. I personally want to aim to have about 1.5 inches or so to the collar. So I have at least another 3 or 4 rows to add on. But if you really are only looking for like a subtle, skinnier collar, you only need to do a few rows, and even at that you can really see that ribbing. So I'm just going to continue to add on as many rows as I would like, and once this is close to done, I'll come back on camera to show you what it looks like. So at this point, I just finished working on row 5 of my neckline, and now you can really see those front and back post stitches. So ultimately we have this really gorgeous, slightly ribbed texture. So I think I'm going to leave mine at a total of 5 rows because my neck hole is starting to close up quite a bit. But when it is laying all nice and flat, I think it looks truly stunning. Like, this looks so gorgeous. So now that my neckline is done, again, I worked a total of 5 rows. What I'm going to do here after my slip stitch is just leave a nice long tail. I can cut my yarn at this point. And now after that slip stitch, I'm just going to yarn over and pull through the tail all the way so that I can tighten up a knot. And now the neckline is finished. All I have to do later on is use your darning needle, use a darning needle and then weave in this remaining tail. So at this point we can head to our sleeves, because in order to work the sleeve cuff, I'm going to use somewhat of the same technique that we used along the front neckline section, but I'm going to walk you guys through the cuff right now. So before I actually start to crochet the cuffs of the sleeve, I do kind of want to walk you guys through my methodology on how I plan to do this. So as you guys can remember, our starting chain of the sleeves and the starting chain of the body is much smaller than the actual width and stitch count of each of the panels. So I'm going to go about crocheting the cuff of the sleeve very similar to how I was working the collar of the sweater. So for row 1 of the cuffs, I will be skipping over this chain and then reaching into the bases of my treble crochets. But in addition to that, I don't want to work the same amount of stitches that I have treble crochets, because our starting chain, as you can recall, is much smaller than the total amount of stitches where we have the treble crochets. So what I'm going to be doing is working single crochets through each single crochet available, and then I'm only going to be working into the center 3 treble crochet. So wherever we have the group of the 5 trebles, I'm going to skip the first treble and the last treble, and I'm just going to work over that chain and into the middle 3 treble crochets. Once I've done those, I will also work a single crochet into the single crochet available, and then repeat that process again. So after that single crochet, I'm going to skip the first treble in the group. I'll work 1, 2, 3 stitches. I'm going to skip the last treble in that group, and then I'm going to work another single crochet into all of my single crochets. I know that's kind of a lot of talking, so at this point I'm just going to walk you guys through it, and hopefully the visualization will help you to finish your sweater. So first I need to reconnect my yarn to the cuff of the sleeve, and what I'm going to do, I'm actually looking at the seam right here where I stitched together the open edges of the sleeve. So what I'm going to do, I'm just going to find a point anywhere near this center seam right here. So I'm going to choose to pick up just right here wherever I can wiggle through, and then we're just going to attach our yarn and tie on a knot. I'm gonna go right back into that same point where I've attached the yarn, pull up a loop and chain 1. And now for my very first single crochet in the row, I do want to hit the first single crochet space available. So I am gonna go into So there is the very first single crochet placed directly on top of the other single crochet. And now at this point again, I'm going to skip that first treble in that cluster of 5, and I'm going to look at the second treble available, which is right here. I'm just going to reach up and over that chain space and pick up wherever I can find at the base of that treble crochet. In all honesty, this part doesn't have to be perfect, just as long as your hook has been inserted anywhere near the base of that treble. So I'm going to reach in and pull up a loop. I'm just going to pull up on the yarn just a little bit so that it's not too tight, and then I can work a regular single crochet. And then again, I'm going to look at the next treble that I have available. So this is going to be my second one. Pick up anywhere that I can through the base of that treble. And again, we are just kind of skipping and reaching over that initial chain. So we're just crocheting directly on top of it and working another single. And then one more time for the third treble in the row, repeat that. So pick up the base, wiggle your hook through, and then pull up on the yarn and work a single crochet. So now at this point you should have about 4 single crochet worked. I have 1 at the very first stitch, and then 1, 2, 3 across the 1, 2, 3 treble crochet. And then now at this point again, I'm going to skip over that very last treble and then just pick up the single crochet that is spaced in between all of the trebles, and then work a single crochet. And now at this point, I can kind of shift my work a little bit, and we're going to repeat that all over again. So looking at this first treble, I'm going to skip this, pick up the second treble and wiggle my hook through the base of that stitch, and then pull up a loop and single crochet. Looking at the next stitch available, and then again, insert through the base, pull up a loop and single crochet. And then one more time for our third, just wiggling it through. It's a little bit thick right there, but those are the center 3 treble crochets. So I've just worked across those center 3 treble crochet, and you should have 1, 2, 3. And then now again, I'm going to skip that very last treble in that grouping, and then work my next single crochet through the single crochet in between the 2 groups, and then work that stitch. So I'm going to repeat this process all the way until the very edge or end of my row, but this is roughly what your work should look like. So this little technique of skipping the first treble and the last treble is going to help cinch in the cuff. And now that I'm making it back to the very start of the row, I have been counting my stitches because you do need to have an even number of stitches, just like we did with the collar, because we need to alternate the front and the back post stitches. So right here, I've just worked my 36th stitch, and this is where I have just left off. I just worked those 3 center treble crochets. So I am going to place another stitch into the single crochet, which is right here. So technically this makes 37 stitches, but again, I do need an even number of stitches. So I'm going to add 1 extra stitch wherever you feel that you need to place it in. If this ends on an even number stitch for you, then all you have left to do is to slip stitch into the chain 1. But if you're like me and it's an odd number, then you do need to add on 1 extra stitch to make it an even number. So that is 38. And then now I can go ahead and slip stitch into my chain 1. So now that I've slip stitched, the end of row 1 is complete, and we can go ahead and start on row 2. So just like before, I'm going to chain 1 and turn my work. And now here for rows 2 and onwards, we are going to alternate the front post and the back post single crochets. So once again, looking here at this very first stitch, I'm going to start with a front post. So I'm going to insert, wrap around the body of the single crochet,
and then that post should be resting across the front of your hook. And then I'm going to yarn over, pull up that loop, and then work a single crochet. And then now looking here at this next stitch, we're going to go to a back post stitch. So again, I'm going to come in from the back side, wrap around the body of that single crochet, and then poke back out. And then your post should be resting across the back side of your hook. So yarn over, pull up that loop, and then finish your single crochet. And then we can switch back to the front post and then the back post. And I'm just going to repeat this all the way across row 2 of the cuffs. And just like we did with the collar, because we started with a front post, our very last stitch should be a back post stitch. And like always, you do want to slip stitch into the chain 1 from the very start of the row. I'm coming up here to the end of row 2 for the cuff, and it's a little bit hard to see, but the start of my row is right here. So this is the chain 1 space, and I've just worked a front post stitch, which means I have one more stitch to go, and this should be my back post. It's a little bit tight, but I'm going to wiggle through and pick up that very last stitch and finish my back post. And now at this point, I can go ahead and connect it in the round. So I'm going to pick up the chain 1 space from the very start of the row, wiggle it in there, and then we can slip stitch row 2 closed. So this is the end of row 2 for the cuff. Let's go ahead and chain 1 and turn our work. And now for rows 3 and onwards, we're always going to start each row with a front post stitch and end each row with a back post, of course with that slip stitch in between. So I've just finished up my very first sleeve, and I've obviously slip stitched. So this is what the cuff is looking like. Now in total, including that very first row of single crochet that we added, I have a total of 7 rows, and I think that this amount of cuff is perfect. It's really close to 2 inches. I should give you guys some quick measurements. So the total length of my cuff with these 7 rows is exactly 2 inches. We hit that on the mark. So I do want to leave this as it is now, but at this point, all we have left to do is to cut our yarn and make sure again to leave a nice long tail so that we can weave this in. And then all I'm going to do is reach back in, and then from here I'm just going to yarn over and pull the whole tail through, and then I can tighten. Oh no, wow, I really just did that on camera. Well, now we can tighten up that little stitch. I'm gonna have to glue that or find a way to fix that later. But that is the end of my row 7, and at this point all that we have left to do is to go ahead and repeat this on the other edge of the sleeve cuff. Now in regards to the bottom band of the sweater, if you would prefer, you really don't have to add it, but of course I do kind of want everything to match, so I'm gonna follow the same exact steps that I used for the cuffs of the sleeve and then mimic that across the bottom portion of the sweater. So same thing that we did before. I'm gonna be working through every single crochet that's available, but I'm also only going to be picking up the center 3 treble crochets. So just like with the cuffs, I'll work a single crochet here. I'll skip that first treble in the group. I'll work 1, 2, and 3 single crochet. I'll skip the very last treble, and then I'll work a stitch also into the single crochet. So it'll go single crochet, and then 1, 2, 3, single crochet, and then again 1, 2, 3, and I'm personally just going to be skipping off again the first and the last treble in each cluster. And just like with the cuff, doing this technique, it will eventually kind of taper in the bottom band of the sweater so that it kind of hugs you a little bit tighter. I'm not going to include this part on camera because it is literally the same exact steps from the cuff. It's just a larger portion that we're working in the round on. But I'm gonna go ahead and finish this up off camera, and then other than that, your sweater should be very close to done. All right, so at this point I have finished up the bottom band. Now I worked a total of 7 rows, so I have that first initial setup row, and then I added on 6 more rows following the front and back post stitches. And this is how my bottom band is looking. So at this point I can go ahead, cut my yarn. I have made sure to leave a super long tail.
so I can cut safely over here. And then all that I have left to do is to tie off a knot, just like so, and then go back and weave in all of my ends. But I just kind of wanted to show you guys the finished sweater. I just tried this on to double check that it fits me perfectly, and loving this neckline. I'm really glad that I did a tighter collar and also one that comes up higher onto my neckline. I hope that you guys really enjoyed this tutorial. This was such a fun sweater to make. And if you happen to make this as well for yourself, please feel free to tag me on Instagram and on TikTok. I'll go ahead and leave the tags right here. I would love to see your sweater creations, how you guys kind of come up with your own color combos. I love you all so much, and I'll be seeing you in the next tutorial. Bye.